Treasurer Weddle is not here. Secretary LaSorsa. Vice Treasurer Hokinson. Chief Justice Wu. Chief of Staff. Director of PR is not here. Director of Wellness and Inclusion. Pro Temp Ludawan. Senator Beckman. Senator Fatima is not here. Senator Fisher. Senator Joseph. Senator Capo. Senator Khan. Senator Novak. Senator Pena. Senator Rose. Advisor Artajani. Advisor Wadsworth is not here. Let it be known that the treasurer is here. Webb is not here. CFB. Wildcat Media. Wildcat Esports. College Council Representative is not here. SAC is not here. And Res Life is not here. Moving on to the approval of the minutes. Is there any discussion for the minutes of 4/9/2026? Seeing no discussion, we'll go into voting. Does anyone not approve unanimous approval? Seeing no disapproval, that passes unanimously. Going back in now to the approval of the agenda. Is there any discussion for today's agenda? President Lunaharo.
Could I entertain a motion to strike out all reports until the beginning of Thursday's meeting?
A motion to strike all reports until Thursday's meeting. Is there so heard? So heard by Pro Tem Ludawan. Is there a second? Second by Senator Rose. Going into discussion on the motion. Is there any discussion for this motion? Seeing no discussion, we'll go into voting on striking out all reports until next Thursday's meeting. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, and all those who abstain, that passes 8-1-0. All right, back into discussion of the approval agenda as a whole. Is there any further discussion for today's agenda? Seeing no further discussion, we'll go voting on today's agenda. All those in favor of today's agenda, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And all those who abstain, that passes 8-1-0. All right, moving on to announcements. There are no announcements. Moving on to guest speakers. There are no guest speakers. Moving on to approval of the change log. There is nothing to approve for the change log. Moving on to old business, Bill 2526-21, Senator Novak.
Motion to accept Senate Bill number 2526-21.
Is there a second? Second by Senator Beckman. Please continue.
We, the members of the Student Government Utica SUNY Poly, as represented in the Senate, do hereby enact as follows. To better affect the role of the organization previously known as the Club Funding Board due to the expanded responsibilities and powers the organization upholds and enforces.
Yes.
Need a second because the submission line also says policy committee, just for minute purposes.
I only see, oh, my bad. I did not see that. All right. Anywho, we had left off discussion in section 6. We will pick up discussion in section 6 as I believe there was a division to the question, as according to the minutes. All right. Is there any continued discussion for Article 6 of the policies and procedures?
It was a division of discussion, not division of question.
Division of discussion. I apologize. Senator Capo.
You open rediscussion of Article 3 for CAB policies and procedures.
We have a motion to reopen discussion of Article 3 of the policies and procedures, second by Senator Pena. Going to discussion on the motion. Is there any discussion for this motion? Senator Fisher.
So we discussed this, and one of the things was, as you know, currently you don't have to do fundraising for the requirements for the club. But then if we don't need to do fundraising, it's still handy to have it say what fundraising is in there. But I don't think it should be defined that it's as successful. If we still want it to be successful, we were looking at to change the amount of what was considered successful. Because as it currently stands, it's $20 or 20% of what is spent. So that's what we were discussing.
All right. Is there any further discussion for reopening discussion of Article 3 of the policy and procedures? Seeing no further discussion, we'll go into voting. All those in favor of reopening discussion of Article 3, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes. We are now back into discussion of Article 3 of CAB policies and procedures. Is there any discussion for Article 3? Senator Novak.
Another thing also we were discussing was to just reiterate in the policies, putting in that you cannot use student activity fees or club funding for the use of purchasing stuff for fundraising. The reason why I'm just reiterating that is you can't expect everyone to want to know how to run a fundraiser to read our 100-page financial policy. So therefore, just reiterating it in the club funding policies will just make it easier for people to get the information.
Alrighty. Is there any further discussion? Senator Capo.
Stated in 3.9.0, a successful fundraiser is defined as having it raised at least $20 or 20% of whatever was spent on the fundraiser, whichever is greater. Why 20%? Like, for example, like Club A spent $100 for a fundraiser and they only got $30 back. Would that be successful? Due to the
CAB. CFB. Pro Tem Bludelon.
The other thing that got raised up was that, I could be wrong on this, but per financial policy, I believe fundraisers are not to be funded by student activities fee. So again, I think we shouldn't have that defined in here if we can't do it per using student activities fee at least. I yield.
Senator Fisher.
What do you think the number should be? What percentage? 100 or 50%?
I'd say 50% or around that number. Shouldn't be too much. I yield to Treasurer Weddle.
Insofar as fundraisers are no longer required for clubs, I don't think we need to define what a successful fundraiser is. If they choose to fundraise, they choose to fundraise. In regards to outlining the requirements per financial policy doesn't prohibit funds being used to run a fundraiser. It's just that the revenue that you collect from that fundraiser can't be used to cover the expenses of that fundraiser. There are other requirements for revenue generally, which fundraisers fall under. So if we want to allude to that, I would recommend just putting something in there. For more information on all fundraisers must follow financial policy, and then that encourages them to refer back to the financial policy. I yield.
Senator Novak.
I make a motion to modify 3.9.0 to strike out a successful fundraiser is defined as having raised at least $20 or 20% of whatever was spent on the fundraiser, whatever was greater. Situation that a club does not meet these funding requirements, the club advisory board and its advisor will be allowed basically cut out everything after it starts saying a successful fundraiser.
We have a motion to cut out every sentence following the first sentence. Is there a second? Second by Senator Rose. Going to discussion on the strikeout. Is there any discussion for the strikeout? Seeing no discussion, we'll go into voting. All those in favor of striking out everything after the first sentence of 3.9.0 in the CAB policies and procedures, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And all those who abstain, that passes 9-0-0. Back in discussion of Article 3. Is there any further discussion? Senator Beckman.
9.1, all fundraisers must follow as outlined. Rephrasing that, hold on. Motion to add 3.9.1. You must follow the financial policy when doing a fundraiser.
We have a motion to add a subsection of 3.9.0 and 3.9.1 as stated by the senator. Is there a second? Second by Senator Pro Tem Blutawan. Going into discussion on adding the subsection. Please just rephrase it in a very clear way. All right, Senator Novak.
What was the last meeting we talked about that the financial policy was on the table?
Is there any discussion for the addition of the sub-bullet point? Seeing no yep, Senator Novak.
Should edit the amendment, or I guess we send it and we put it back in to state specifically which article in financial policy. Just instead of saying, oh, look at financial policy, you can say, look at financial policy article, I haven't found it yet, but it's whatever one it would be.
All right, Senator Beckman. Okay. President, oh, okay. Is there any further discussion for the subsection? Oh, yeah, I also have not received it yet. Senator Novak.
To Treasurer Weddle, which article is fundraising under? Because I just don't see one named fundraiser.
Yeah, it's not under an article called fundraiser. It's just generally under the revenue article. That's Article 11.
President Lunaharo.
I don't think we should mention the specific parts of where in the financial policy it is, because financial policy could change in the future and could cause a lot of confusion later on. So we should just say refer to financial policy.
Media.
Organizational policy anyways, so it doesn't, I don't think we need to say that, but it could be a good addition to just say look and find, but we can't be too specific, because if we get 13th edition of financial policy, we'd have to update every policy that it's mentioned at 12th, so I yield.
Is there any further discussion for the amendment? President Lunaharo.
I'm not seeing the sent text yet. I'm not sure if it has been sent yet or not. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Apologies.
Senator Novak.
Putting into which article to look at, just because financial policy is a large beast of a government document, like at least 80 pages long. I think we should at least have something on there, especially since the section's not named fundraising, it's named revenue. That might be someone's just looking at it. They might be looking for an article called fundraiser, like I was looking for. So at least having it specified to be revenue, I think we should do it. So that way it's not sending people into the 80-page document to read it all to find the specific stuff. At least I think, having something to go towards. I know we don't want to specify it too much because stuff can change, but I think we should at least have something to show the right location. I yield.
Treasurer Weddle.
Financial policy 12th edition is 7 pages longer than CFB's policies and procedures. It is only 32 pages. I think people can find it if we say you have to follow financial policy. Clubs should know what's in financial policy anyways. It frankly doesn't take that long to read through all of it because there's a lot of white space. There's a fair amount of just half pages. Some articles are only a couple of sections long. I yield to our CFB representative.
A motion to call to question. We're not, yeah, we are in a motion.
Yeah, we are.
You rescinded it? I never called on you to hear the rescind. Okay. Cool. All right. Wonderful. Please state it more clearly next time. Senator Beckman.
We talked about it. Whatever. I would like to remake my motion. I sent it all to the horseshoe, the wording. All fundraisers must follow all relevant policy outlined in financial policy.
All right. Is there a second? Second by Senator Fisher. Going to discussion of the amendment. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll go into voting on the amendment. All those in favor of the subsection of 3.9.0 and the CAB policies and procedures, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes 8-1-1. Back in discussion of Article 3 as a whole, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go back into discussion of Article 6. We're now back in discussion of Article 6. Is there any discussion for Article 6? Chief Justice Wu.
I'm about to make a motion, so I'll send it out to the horseshoe. Motion to add in bullet point 6.8.4.1 underneath 6.8.4 to remove the club representative from their position. A petition of at least 75 signatures should be submitted following official SGU petitions policy. After the petition is made into a resolution and voted affirmative by the SGU Senate, the CAB Executive Board will hold a vote to keep or remove the club representative following the same process as their election.
Is there a second? Second by Senator Pena. Going to discussion on the amendment, is there any discussion? Senator Beckman.
Additionally to this, have the fact that they can be removed with strikes mentioned, given every other elected position can be removed with strikes. This, I yield.
CFB.
SGU policy supersedes ours, so they're still subject to the strike policy. This is basically like a vote of no confidence from the clubs. I yield.
See, all right?
6.8.4.1, the motion that was sent out by Chief Justice Wu. President Lunaharo?
Could I make a suggestion that it would make more sense for the removal of the club representative to be voted by the clubs who voted them in the first place rather than the Senate? I yield.
Chief Justice Wu?
So the reason why I'm doing this is because it wouldn't be an official petition if we went through, like, you can't do a petition and then just send it to CFB. Petitions have to go through the SGU and then become a resolution or a bill. So having 75 signatures, it would just, you'd have to add into policy a whole thing for petitions for CAB. So we're just going to have the senators vote on it, and then the clubs can vote on it at the very end. Thank you.
CFB?
Approval by the Senate, and then the clubs vote on it after if it gets approved by the Senate. So the clubs would still be voting.
Senator Novak?
Why 75 people when petition policies that says we need 50 for a petition to go through? Why are we increasing the amount of people that need to sign the petition? I yield to Chief Justice Wu.
Well, I just thought it was reasonable, but if you want to bring it down to 50, like, go for it. I yield to Wildcat Media.
I think it's important that we have some sort of checks and balances besides the strikes, especially since this is a person sent to represent clubs. To have the clubs be able to hold this person accountable, I think, is very important. And I think that 75 would be a better number because if we, I mean, could maybe, I don't know, because we have a lot of clubs, so, but it could be lower. We might not have a lot of clubs every year, so I yield to Pro Temp Ludowan.
I'm kind of with media on this. I think it should be 75 signatures, just for my reasoning being this position is meant to be elected by the clubs. And if we want to, is talking about removal, if we want to remove them, then I think it should be held to a higher standard because the position is meant to serve the clubs. And if the clubs want to, if we can't just get 50 people, any 50 people, and be like, hey, we're just going to remove somebody that the clubs elected for themselves. So I think it should be held to a bit of a higher standard. I yield.
Senator Novak?
Just with 50 people is the other thing that media brought up. We're not guaranteed to have a lot of clubs. We've a lot this semester of like 57, I believe, but in prior years we had like 30, and so there's no guarantee that we won't get lower members or anything. It all really depends on what the future incoming amount of students is. And along with that, a lot of people who are in clubs, as we discussed last week, don't care. They don't actually interact with either CFB or other clubs, and so if somebody is abusing their position of power, they might not care to sign a petition because they just don't care, especially if they're non-executive and they're just a person who goes to a club like once a week and then otherwise just hangs out in the dorm room. So that's why I'm saying 75 might be a bit much to fill that petition, in my opinion. I yield.
Wildcat Esports. Senator Rose.
Be held to remove the club representative. So I think it is fine if it's a little low, just in case there are not too many clubs one year. Because ultimately, there still needs to be a vote from the Senate and the clubs. I yield.
Senator Beckman.
Have collected signatures, and I would say it's pretty easy. All you have to do is go talk to them, and I haven't had anyone tell me no yet. So I don't think having a 75 signature limit is a challenge in any real sense. I yield.
All right, we've discussed this point of 75 to 50 pretty thoroughly at this point. Does anyone have any additional things, or is any additional motion or request being made for this amendment? Senator Novak.
I'll just make one request quickly. It cannot be held out. I also request the Chief Justice to rescind the motion and remake it with 50 instead, and then yield.
All right. Is there any further discussion for the amendment? Seeing no, Wildcat Esports. Chief Justice Wu.
I just think that you guys can vote on it, and if it doesn't pass, then I'll bring it down to 50. I yield.
CFB.
Question.
We have a call to question. Is there a second? Second by Senator Beckman. Moving into the vote of the call to question. All those in favor of the call to question, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes. We are now on the vote of 6.8.4.1. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain. Senator Fatima, I didn't see your hand raised at all. I apologize. Okay, approved. Then that passes 8-0. Back in discussion of Article 6. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 7 appeals. Is there any discussion for Article 7? CFB.
Okay, can I make a motion to alter 7.7.0 to strike out and replace it with a comma, and then after CAB president, put and SGU vice president?
We have a motion to strike out and, have a comma, and have and SGU Vice President. Is there a second? Second by Senator Fisher. Going to discussion of the amendment. Is there any discussion for this amendment? Treasurer Weddle.
Could you just state the section number again?
Is there any discussion for the amendment? Seeing no further discussion, we'll go into voting. All those in favor of the amendment to 7.7.0, striking out and, comma, and SGU Vice President, please raise your hand. All those opposed, and all those who abstain, that passes 901. All right. Back in discussion of Article 7, President Lunaharo. Okay.
I'd like to know the reason for the abstention.
All right. Senator Novak.
Lack of information.
All right. President Lunaharo.
Could I ask our CFB representative to give a brief summary of the main changes in Article 7?
Yeah, so basically we have, again, changing the name on everything. We added, so in Article 6, we added a process to remove club executives, and basically we added an appeal process for that. We added an appeal process for the officers if they do get dismissed, and that's about it.
Alrighty. Is there any further discussion for Article 7? Treasurer Weddle.
7.7.0, I recognize it was just amended to add the SGU Vice President. I don't think that goes far enough, considering both the CAB advisor and the CAB president are involved in the decision to remove a club executive. I think to have an appeal that is an actual appeal, they should be appealing to a different body. I think that body should be the Student Government Executive Board, along with the SGU advisor, who may also be the CAB advisor, but either way, that's within a different role. Even though they're not involved in the removal, the SGU Executive Board supersedes CFB or CAB. They should really be the ones deciding that appeal. You're removing an officer through a very new disciplinary procedure. I don't think it makes sense to have two of the same people who voted on removing the officer in the first place be two of the three people who are voting on their appeal. The SGU Vice President might oppose the decision, but they don't actually have the ability to do anything about it. If you're voting by majority, which I assume you are because it's three people making that decision. I yield.
CFB.
Most of the executive board isn't really in the day-to-day CFB or CFB operations, and the vice president is the org's direct supervisor, so that's why I simply put in the vice president. If you would like to make a motion to alter this, I won't, but I will not make it myself.
Senator Novak.
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit confused because I had both the club executive and the CFB officer, so I'm not entirely sure what we're talking about. But at least for the club officer, I think we don't really need, not club executive, I don't think we need that many people to be involved for the appeal of a non.
To with the appeal to the executive board was for the CAB officers, not executive officer of a club.
I said both, so I wasn't sure what we're talking.
Is there any further discussion for Article 7? Treasurer Weddle.
I'd like to make a motion to amend 7.7.0 to state CAB officers who are dismissed are allowed one appeal made within a week of dismissal. The officer must send their formal appeal in email to the SGU advisor and SGU executive board. I yield.
So moved by Senator Beckman. Is there a second? Second by Senator Khan. Going to discussion of the amendment. Is there any discussion for this amendment? Wildcat Esports.
They don't
Senator Novak?
Because, I mean, we haven't got to that, but that was one of the main reasons why I wanted an overhaul to the strike appeal system, and I made the bill I did. I know we haven't got to that, but the problem is with a lot of disappointing actions already in SGU, when you appeal something, it goes to the person who's made the disappointing action in the first place, which makes no sense because 9 times out of 10, if somebody made a disappointing action in the first place, they're probably going to stick to it. Therefore, by adding people who were not originally in the decision, they'll actually have a new perspective to bring in it instead of it just being the same people. Because if you decided already, oh, this person needs to be removed to the point that you are actually using this process that just instantly kicks them out of their position, you're probably going to stick to that decision no matter what excuse or type of counterpoint the person who's being kicked out brings up. And at least in this way, there's more of a chance that a person's counterpoint will be taken, I guess, more unbiasedly by adding in people who are not involved in the original decision. I yield.
Is there any further discussion for the amendment of 7.7.0? Seeing no further discussion, we'll go into voting on the amendment of 7.7.0, stating at the end, send in their formal appeal and email to the SGU advisor and SGU executive board. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes 9-0-1. Back in discussion of Article 7 as a whole. Is there any further discussion for Article 7? Pro Tem Ludewan.
I get the reasoning, and I voted in favor of it for the appeal to go to the executive board. I wonder how CFB would feel about having the CFB president in the appeal meeting, so that way they can give their side of their rationale behind the dismissal. I yield to CFB.
Vice President with Executive Board. Okay. I would prefer that because can't really appeal a decision if you don't have both sides, so I yield.
Treasurer Weddle?
Yeah, I was planning to entertain a motion to also modify 7.7.1 to state meetings must be held within 1 week with the dismissed officer and a separate meeting with the CAB advisor and CAB president. The purpose being that the CAB advisor and CAB president could provide information to the executive board, and the officer could also provide their perspective. So 7.7.1 would state meetings must be held within 1 week with this dismissed officer and a separate meeting with the CFB advisor and CAB advisor and CAB president. A decision must be delivered following these 2 meetings. Happy to send that out. If people
That was so moved, and second by Senator Novak, so moved by Senator Fisher. All right. Going into discussion of the amendment of 7.7.1, is there any discussion? I believe you stated you were sending this out. Okay, Senator Novak.
I do think this is a good idea because I don't think the person made in the original decision should be the ones voting, but they should still have a say. But this way, we're kind of like, I guess a good way to think about it is we're kind of running it like how actual courts run, with the executive board being the jury and voting, and then the removed officer being the defendant, and then the club advisor and CFP president being the prosecutors. It'd be a bit weird if, like, for example, in a actual judge, like in an actual criminal, I mean, now this is a bit different, but in an actual criminal case, the prosecutor was on the jury and voting, because that means the consent, like the voting would already have bias in it. This way, we remove that bias in the voting, and they still get to make their points, but they're not actually voting on the final decision.
Senator Beckman?
It got sent out.
Okay. Is there any further discussion for the amendment? Pro Tem Ludewan?
I think we should still have a timeline in there for when a decision should be sent out, because the amended motion states that the decision must be delivered following these 2 meetings. it can be followed by a month later, and I don't think that that's most effective. So I think we would probably want to resend and amend that so it at least states a timeline. I yield.
All right. Is there any further discussion for the amendment to 7.7.1? Seeing no further discussion, we'll go into voting on the amendment of 7.7.1. All those in favor of the amendment of 7.7.1, please raise your hand. All those opposed, and all those who abstain, that passes 9-1-0. Back in discussion of Article 7 as a whole, Senator Novak.
Can I make an amendment to the new 7.7.1 to end to the end of to modify the sentence, "The decision must be delivered following these two meetings," to a decision must be delivered following these two meetings within 7 business days.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second by Pro Temp Ludewan. Moving in discussion of the amendment to 7.7.1. Is there any discussion for this amendment? Seeing no discussion, we'll go into voting. Adding on to the end of 7.7.1, please just restate it for clarity's sake.
Removing a decision must, adding a decision must be delivered following these two meetings within 7 business days.
All right. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed, and all those who abstain, that passes 10-0-0. Back in discussion of Article 7 as a whole, is there any further discussion for Article 7? Seeing no further discussion, we'll be moving on to Article 8. Is there any discussion for Article 8 clauses? Treasurer Weddle.
Entertain a motion to amend 8.3.0 to state during the following time frames, clubs may only activate at the kitten level, essentially just cutting that out. The phrase that says or ocelot level has been removed from CAB's tiers, so it no longer applies. I yield.
So heard by Pro Tem Ludewan, second by Senator Beckman. Moving in discussion of the amendment of crossing out or ocelot from 8.3.0. Is there any discussion for this amendment? Seeing no discussion, does anyone not approve unanimous approval of this amendment? Seeing no disapproval, that passes unanimously. Back in discussion of Article 8 as a whole, is there any further discussion for Article 8? Seeing no further discussion, we'll be moving on to Article 9, enactment and jurisdiction. Is there any discussion for enactment and jurisdiction? Seeing none, we'll move on to Article 10, appendices. Senator Novak.
This was a big concern, specifically from Creo Services. One of Creo Services' big concerns, some other concerns I've heard from staff, was the removal of the community service requirements. The big reason they gave at the time, I mean, it was a short discussion, but they gave was they feel that having the Creo Service requirements, while sometimes it could be hard to fulfill, it made it so students were actually getting involved with the community and getting outreaching to the community, because otherwise our students and our campus doesn't really interact with the local community that much, and therefore by removing this, we are moving like the only way in which our clubs do get involved with the community. And along with this, they also felt that it was a bit weird to give clubs money and then not expect anything of them. While we still have the event requirements, they figured that that isn't enough of an expectation, and that the clubs, because like people would be holding events that they find fun, and that there should be some sort of work involved in getting the funding. I yield to, I guess, Cab.
With any concerns with this, so again, I can't speak to what they're thinking because again, no one's talked to me, so I'm just gonna state that. And secondly, just because we removed the community service requirement doesn't mean they can't still go and help. I'm not barring them. I'll still encourage it. I'll still promote it. It's not like the reason that we're removing it from a straight up requirement is because there's a limited amount of community service available on campus, and we do tell them to go off campus and look for other opportunities, but we don't provide transportation. And so it can be difficult. And to counter the point where they're getting money for basically not giving back to the community, they're getting money from student activities fees and they're holding events for the students. So they're still giving back, it just may look a little differently. I yield.
Senator Novak?
I'm just bringing it up because it was a concern that was brought up during one of our SGU tabling hours. So I just thought it would be something that we should at least discuss a tiny bit because it was a concern.
CFB?
Right now, so I have no gauge on the actual opinion on this, so I yield.
Alrighty. Is there any further discussion for Appendix A? Senator Beckman?
No longer have to include this position is not RA eligible in the contracts. I could be wrong. I yield.
I apologize. I need someone to correct me. When the breakup of discussion was made, was it by appendix per appendix or is by all the appendices at once? It was just by article? Okay, so then we are in the discussion of all the appendices at once. I apologize. Could you refer to contract specific, anything like that? Senator Beckman?
Contracts have them, or at least most of them. But that was more of a question because I thought we had changed that, but I'm not sure. I yield.
CFB?
Instances of this position is not RA eligible to this position will exceed 8 hours per week.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second by Pro Temp Ludewan. Moving discussion of striking out this position is not RA eligible and replacing with state the line again.
This position will exceed 8 hours per week.
All right. Is there any discussion? Treasurer Weddle.
For some of these positions, specifically CAB president, I don't know that makes sense. Realistically, you're overseeing and managing dozens of clubs. It takes a lot of hours to do so. I don't know that you can adequately represent and manage you can adequately manage 5 people beneath you as well as dozens of clubs. Handling an entire organization that's worth tens of thousands of dollars and also being an advisor to over a dozen different students who live on campus, I think is unrealistic. I don't think it's inappropriate to restrict this position to being RA ineligible. I think we want whichever person is appointed and confirmed by the Senate to be CAB president to be focused on being CAB president in addition to their academics, right? They're a student first, and if they choose to seek out this role and receive this role, I think that should be their primary concern, not residential life. I yield.
Senator Novak.
Think that even making us change of saying this in a contract update should also be changed to being back to this position's not RA eligible. I don't think we should be doing this for any of our contracts. And I mean, we're not on the contract bill yet, so we can't discuss it for now, for this. Also, we have to remember RAs work 40 hours, or expected to work 40 hours a week and have 9 hours of free time. That was the main reason why these positions or labor is not RA eligible, is because the fact that they would then if they take up morning hours, we're leaving them with less free time of the dedicated amount of free time they're expected to have. And while maybe the RA workload does not actually reflect those 40 hours, the 40 hours is what is expected of them in the RA contracts. And therefore, I think that's how we should have it. And also, we do need to have these positions, I think, make sure also they're actually focusing on their work as, CFB or CAB, because already people are not the happiest with response times to emails. I don't think people would be even happy if those response times get longer, because now they also are spending most of the time being RAs and are busy. Yes, I know it's up to the individual if they think they can handle it, but still, I do think we need some limitations here. I yield.
CFB. We have a motion to call the question. Is there a second? Second by Senator Beckman. Voting on the call to question. All those in favor of the call to question, please raise your hand. All those opposed. And all those who abstain. There's a 6-4 split. Is that majority?
It's supposed to be 2/3.
Two-thirds, correct. So that does not pass. Okay. Treasurer Weddle.
Just sort of add some more context on the discussion that was going on. I am on SUNY Poly's residential life page. One of the frequently asked questions is, can I be an RA and also have another job on campus? It states very explicitly, employment or paid positions in addition to serving in the role of an RA generally not permitted. Rare special circumstances related to specialized academic skills may be granted, but must be approved by their supervisor. Additional employment opportunities may not exceed 9 hours per week for any reason. Realistically, I think the CAB president works more than 9 hours per week. I don't think you can consider being president of CFB a specialized academic skill. It's student involvement, it's student engagement, it's great to see, but it doesn't fall under ResLife's policy that they have outlined. I don't think we should be going against that. I yield.
Pro Tem Bluedorn.
I can kind of speak to this as a current RA for this year. One thing I know, I recently talked to the director of ResLife, is that the ResLife contracts are going to be updated in certain respects, especially when it comes to those types of things. For one, there are currently a lot of RAs that have other positions on campus and have full-time jobs off campus as well. So even though the contract says, well, the website says that, RAs are still allowed to work outside. This is also a conversation that was had with ResLife on that side, is that the non-RA eligibility was something from prior administration and is not held up by this current ResLife staff, and the ResLife director feels that doing this is kind of restrictive in the sense that you're kind of restricting a student with potential to not have that is interested in doing multiple things to just one thing. So yeah, I yield to
Senator
CFB.
Rose. Oh, never mind, CFB.
I just also want to add on, ResLife can have their own requirements for their RAs. I just don't think it's really our place to decide what an RA can and can't do. If ResLife feels that they can adequately do their job and handle this, I think that's up to ResLife. And again, this isn't solely permitting them. It's not saying, yes, you can. It's still up to ResLife at the end of the day. This is really just a change in verbiage. It says the expectations that it's more than 8 hours a week. I feel like it's a pretty fair change in words. I don't think it's our place to really bar somebody who is an RA from holding a position in SGU. I yield.
Webb. Senator Rose.
Just CAB president could state that it exceeds 8 hours, and CAB president states that it is not RA eligible. If we want to go that route, I yield.
Senator Beckman.
I would like to add, does Subway tell you can't work as an RA? No, it's the RA, like ResLife, whose decision is to say, hey, no, you don't have time. Your other employer is not responsible. We are not Res Life. This isn't our job. I yield.
All right, Senator Novak.
So, I do want to speak on some prior experience as working in the club funding board. Please point of order me if this is getting out of scope. But when I was working as CFB secretary, our vice president of the time was also an RA. And since they were also an RA, they ended up not really showing up to work too much and not doing their delegated work as they were too busy with their prior RA experience. This ended up leading to me as secretary having to pick up the slack of the vice president of CFB at the time and having to do their delegated tasks such as running the CFB meetings, helping research CFB new policies, and helping manage different like websites and like Excel sheets we were using to keep track of club stuff that was all originally supposed to be for the VP of the time. And this was really overworking and overstepping me, as I was now basically, in a way, doing two positions at once, but I was only getting paid and being compensated for the secretary role. And so, at least in my experience, even having this for a non-head role leads to it having this work. This ends up being delegated to someone else. A lot of times, a person under you. And I don't think that's fair to those people that then they have to pick up your slack because of the fact that you're not able to do it because you're an OA, especially since then you can't remove these positions either because you're not the supervisor. I yield.
All right. Considering the conversation is around yes or no on the motion, I'm going to ask that discussion ends and we go into voting. Is everyone okay with this? All right. Sure. We're in the motion on just crossing out this position is not RA eligible and putting in this position exceeds 8 hours. So all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed? And all those who abstain? 7-2-1. All right, that passes. Back into, yes.
7-2?
7-2-1.
Okay.
Back into discussion of the appendices as a whole. Treasurer Weddle.
Going just back into the contracts for a moment. The contract now states this position will exceed 8 hours per week. I believe that all the organizations were asked to complete time audits. I imagine that many of these positions exceed not just 8 hours a week, but quite a bit more than that. I think it's extremely disingenuous to just state this position exceeds 8 hours per week when it may exceed 16 hours per week, when it may exceed 20 hours per week, when it may exceed 12 hours per week. I think some clarity in that regard would be helpful. I think if we are going to allow the president of a $70,000 student organization to also be an RA on campus, we should have some more clarity about how many hours they're actually going to be spending outside of their academics, outside of their status as a residential advisor, outside of the 25 to 35 students that they are supposed to be overseeing on campus, to just really make it clear about what's going on here. I yield.
Sure. I can provide the time audits that I was given. The president position does exceed 8 hours a week. The vice president had about 42 hours over their time audit, and the secretary had about 25 hours over the time audit. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was given as the time audit. So, CFB, would you like to clarify that time audit?
Audits are reflective of the work that we did this year, but these positions and their requirements have all changed. Their contracts are changed. They're different. I can't say for certain how many hours it's going to be. Yes, it might be way more than 8 hours a week. I know the CFE presidents will be. But in contrary to that, it's just the opposite of this position will not exceed 8 hours per week. That's why I chose the verbiage. I mean, again, if y'all want to make a motion to fix the verbiage, I won't won't hold it against y'all, but I don't personally see the point. I yield.
Senator Rose?
We don't want to specify one thing and then it doesn't end up being that. And if we then try to avoid that by going under, that could give, by specifying not just 8 hours, but saying a more specific number that's lower than it might be, that could lead to misunderstanding. I yield.
All right. For any further discussion regarding the 8 hours per week or whatnot, because it was a vote that was made specifically stating a change to it, I'd ask that if any further motion be made, it would be a motion to reconsider that vote. Otherwise than that, I would prefer discussion move on from the case as we discussed it thoroughly during the actual motion. Treasurer Weddle.
Just to respond to that briefly, I don't think that's true. I think the point of the motion was to open these positions up to be RA eligible. As our CAB representative just stated, the reason for exceeds 8 hours per week was just to have it be the opposite of does not exceed 8 hours per week. To Senator Rose's point, it's a great point, and I think it is a point with when we get into specifying these time hours. There have been weeks where senators have had to work more than 8 hours, for example, when we had an hours-long emergency meeting on a weekend, right? That was a rare occurrence, but it does happen. If I could just ask the Vice President for some clarity on what the average amount of time that was spent for each of the CAB positions, to briefly respond to our CAB representative's earlier point that those time audits only represent the amount of work that was done this year. In next year's budget, there was requested a stipend increase for pretty much every single position on the basis that their contracts were getting updated. Additional clarity would be added for the amount of work that they were doing. Those were some of the only positions in next year's budget that actually saw an increase year to year. I yield.
All right. Senator Novak.
That, agreeing with what Treasurer Weddle said, and I guess disagreeing with what Senator Rose said, is I know we don't want to specify exactly how
Again,
much.
I'm going to cut this off. The discussion was made. You can do a motion to reconsider, but it was very thoroughly discussed during the previous motion. We have a lot of other things in the appendices discussed, including a whole new contract, if anyone wants to look at other things, but there is plenty of other points to discuss besides the one bullet point. Webb? We have a motion to reconsider the vote. Is there a second? Second by Senator Fisher. We are now voting on the motion to reconsider. All those in favor of reconsidering the vote, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And all those who abstain? 3-7, that motion dies. All right, back in discussion of the appendices as a whole. Treasurer Weddle.
If I could ask the chair once again to send or provide the average amount of time that each of the CAB positions spent based off their time audit that was asked for previously and was not provided. I yield.
Sure. The time audit was asked one meeting of the org heads. About a 2-week period was given, and the times were usually given on a per weekly basis dependent on the org. For the times that I got from CFP, it was one slotted amount of hours. All right.
I apologize. I don't think I actually heard you state the amount of hours that each position spent per week. That, for clarity, that's what I was
stated
asking.
at the previous time when I mentioned all the hours.
I apologize. I don't recall exactly what you said for those positions.
So the times that I have for them is low-key over 8 hours a week, in quote, 42, 25, and no report from the treasurer as they had resigned at that point. CFB.
Reconsidered this topic. I think we should move on. I'm just going to request the chair that we move on.
Alrighty. Wildcat Events Board. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm going to listen to CFB on this one. We have discussed this point thoroughly, and now we're arguing about something that's not related to the bill. Treasurer Weddle.
In the appendices, there's an addition of a acknowledgement and agreement form. This form is labeled Student Organization and Club Executive Acknowledgement Form. I think the form is good to have. I don't think it's something that should be buried in CFB's policies. I think this should more generally be something that exists either within student government or preferably within the Center for Student Involvement. This could apply to not just clubs, but as is stated in the title, student organizations as well. I think it makes sense for, in addition to the contracts that student organization officers and some of our volunteers have to sign, that all club executives, all organization officers are held to these same standards. I would like to, if possible, ask our advisor for her thoughts on removing this form from the CFB policies and procedures and making it instead something that just exists with CSI, perhaps managed by SGU's office manager. Thank you.
Our advisor.
Specific acknowledgement form was made specifically for CFB. There will be an overarching one when the internal control policies come out for the fall, but this one was specifically made for CFB advisors and clubs. So there will be another one, but this was specifically made for CFB. I yield.
Senator Beckman.
We can do both. We can put it in CSI and also leave it here. And I don't think that has any negative repercussions. I yield.
CFP.
Acknowledgement agreement to CAB.
We have a motion to change CFB to CAB on the second bullet point of the acknowledgement agreement. Do we have a second? Second by Pro Temp Ludewan. Moving discussion on the amendment. Is there any discussion for this amendment? Is anyone, Senator Novak? Okay. Does anyone not approve unanimous approval for this amendment? Seeing no disapproval, that passes unanimously. Senator Novak?
So going on to this acknowledge agreement form in general, I guess specifically section 2, I understand why some of these are here. Doesn't make sense, but I'm a bit confused why alcohol and drug policies is included as a mandatory read. I can understand that for OAs, but for club executives or CFP executives, I mean, I don't know how there would even be a mishap in the first place to even have drugs or alcohol start getting involved in your CFP or club activities that it needs to be a mandatory read. That's just a bit of, I guess, confusion to me. I yield the cab.
I yield.
Chief Justice Wu?
CAB has to do a lot of disciplinary stuff with clubs. So if a club wants to get lit or something, then they have to know what to tell them they can't do. I yield to the advisor.
It's in here specifically because there have been many students present at meetings, at this meeting, at pro temp meetings, at club meetings, that reek of marijuana. So that's why that's in here. Professional decisions, you can't lead a club, you can't lead an event if you're under the influence, whether it's legal or not. I yield.
Senator Novak?
I did not notice that, so that is my bad. I didn't notice that we had that problem. I yield.
Treasurer Weddle?
Can I entertain a motion to amend the student organization club executive acknowledgement form to remove the student organization from the title and replace student organization and organization with club where applicable? If this is meant to be for club executives, I think just some clarity would be helpful in that regard. I yield.
Just to clarify, you are asking for a motion to remove all mentions of the student organization section of it from the acknowledgement form?
To just the phrase student organization and to, where applicable, replace it with club so that grammar is upheld.
Gotcha. So moved by Pro Temp, second by Senator Beckman. Going to discussion of the amendment. Is there any discussion for this amendment? Seeing none, we'll go into voting on removing the student organization from the student organization and replacing it when applicable to club. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And all those who abstain? That passes unanimously. Back in discussion, the appendices as a whole. Is there any further discussion for the appendices? Seeing no further discussion for the appendices, that is the conclusion of the split up of discussion. So we will now go into voting. Senator Rose?
Discussion of Article 6.
We have a motion to reopen discussion of Article 6. Is there a second? Second by Senator Capo. Is there any discussion for this motion? Senator Beckman?
You.
Want to make in the article.
Alrighty. Is there any further discussion for reopen discussion of Article 6? Seeing no further discussion, we'll go into voting. All those in favor of reopening discussion of Article 6, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And all those who abstain, that passes 9-1-0. Back in discussion of Article 6. Is there any discussion for Article 6? Senator Rose?
Discussed last meeting, but 6.4.0 is a repeat of 6.6.0. But aside from that, I would like to make a motion to add after 6.2.1, 6.2.2, when possible, informal warning should be given 1 week prior to a notice of probation. This will include the reasoning for the upcoming probation, and then update 6.2.2, now 6.2.3, to state all warnings and notice of probation will be sent formally through email.
I'd like to ask that be
and
sent
yes,
out.
that
to
will
the
be sent
workshop.
out
Thank
shortly.
you. We do have a second from Senator Novak. So moving discussion of the amendment of, I believe it was the addition of a new 6.2.2, correct, and then an update of 6.2.2, which is now 6.2.3. Is that correct, Senator Rose? Wonderful. All right. CFB?
That's the point of it. It's supposed to be a warning period before they get frozen. I don't really see the purpose of me sending it warning prior, and it's not always applicable. I can't always know. Like, you'll get put on probation if you miss the CFB meetings twice, 2 times in a row, or you miss 4 total in a semester. What if you don't follow the policies and procedures? You don't follow them. Why do I have to give you a warning when that is the point of probation? I yield.
Senator Rose?
I think a lot of clubs, for example, were missing some documents like minutes this semester or last semester, and some of them were expecting a warning to like, hey, you're missing these documents, so then they could realize that they didn't turn them in, so they could. Especially with the event certificates, I think were a big problem. I yield to CFB.
Pretty decent leniency if they were slightly late. I gave them all this warning prior in the CFB meeting, which they're all required to attend, at least one representative. I mean, no one reached out and asked either if they were in good standing. So again, I still don't see why it has to be put in policy that I have to provide a warning. It still defeats the purpose of probation in my eyes. I yield.
Senator Novak?
Given out at the CFB meeting. From what I got from most clubs who got probation from that, what they thought was discussed in the meeting was, hey, if you're getting probated, you will get an email saying what you're missing. If you don't fulfill that stuff, you'll get probation. They did not expect that to be a general warning, especially because there's no way of knowing if you are missing documents, and if you are missing documents, what documents you are missing. So especially due to the fact that currently you're engaged, there's no way to know if anyone else in your the only way you can find out if something was submitted is if you look at the account of that should have submitted them. For example, as a secretary of a club, I do not know if one of my other club executives submitted meeting minutes unless I have access to their account, because the only forms I can view from my club is the forms I submitted. Therefore, having a warning allows you to actually know if you're missing this stuff and know ahead of time. Another example too is for the event certificates. That was new this semester, and I didn't know we had to hand those in. And then my clubs got probated because of those event submission documents, and I had no warning that I was missing that. I had no warning that I had to fix that, and I didn't know until after my club was probated. And probation it's not being as bad as being frozen, but it's not like you can get out of probation. It does have some big restrictions on it, such as not being able to spend club funds on non-event stuff. So you can't use it on meetings if you needed it for meetings. You can't use it for special projects on your club, which might not be event related. And having a week warning is just something that's good, and something that we used to do in CFB is, like, if you miss, for example, 2 meetings, CFB weekly meetings, you get an email saying, hey, you haven't shown up for these 2 meetings. If you miss another one, you are in danger of being frozen. Please show up. I just don't see why we can't just do something like that. Yes, I know it takes time to send email, but you can just reuse the same emails over and over again and just change who reciprocates it, or stuff such as that. And I feel like it just makes it a lot easier to get past and not have these problems in the first place if people have ample opportunity to be able to correct their mistakes, especially since sometimes mistakes happen. I yield.
CFB.
You don't get frozen, and it is very clearly written what the requirements are. So if you're missing 2 CFB meetings, it is in writing that you are subject to being put on probation. So again, I don't see the point of this warning. In addition to that, I know they can't exactly see what they're missing, but some of our best clubs, the clubs that are on top of everything, reach out to us periodically and they just ask. They're like, where are we standing? Are we in good standing? Which we answered, again, our emails almost at all hours of the day. So you'll get a response. And if you don't, you can come up to us after a CFB meeting. We're not hiding. Like, there's so many ways to prevent this from happening, and I don't think a warning is really going to aid in this effect. I feel like it's just going to slow our entire process down. I yield.
Pro Tem Luan.
Said, I feel like as club executives, you should be in communication with each other. You should be holding your secretary responsible, like, hey, did you submit the meeting minutes? So yeah, I feel like clubs themselves within their executives should be communicating. And again, if the probation is meant to be a warning, I don't get why we need another warning before you get a probation. I yield.
Senator Rose.
The probation restricts the clubs. I feel like even though it is meant as a warning for a freeze, the probation itself is still a form of punishment. I yield.
Yeah, it's a form of punishment because they're not following the policies and procedures that are clearly stated. In addition to this, there is always a requirement of probation that will let them be taken off probation once they finish it. If, say, they miss 2 CFB meetings in a row, what my board does every single time is if you attend the next 2 CFB meetings, you're off probation. And the main restriction is they can't request extra funding. And why should they be allowed to request extra funding if they're not following the policies and procedures that they signed up to follow? I yield.
Chief Justice Wu.
I think this comes down to we need to hold people responsible. We are all legal adults, and I think that people should do the jobs that they decided to do, and we can trust them, and we shouldn't have to hold every single person's hand through every single thing. I yield.
Webb. Senator Novak?
Gotten cyclic.
Alrighty. Is there any additional information to be added to the reasoning behind the?
Something additional to add.
All right.
A lot of times there is a problem with clubs where somebody is absent from a meeting. They are sick. They have an obligation that makes it so they cannot meet something, and they tell their fellow club executives, "Can you please do this for me?" And you trust that the club executive will
I
do.
apologize. I will be cutting you off. You did already mention this in your last statement. You did. In your very thorough statement, you had mentioned this. Is there any further discussion that has not already been covered? Yes. Okay. Yes, you can step out. Is there any further Wildcat Esports? We have a motion to call to question. Is there a second? Second by Senator Khan. Going on to vote of the call to question. All those in favor to call to question, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And all those abstain? That passes 7-1-2. All right, now voting on the amendment of adding 6.2.2 and then amending 6.2.2 now as 6.2.3. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that motion dies 1-8-1. Back in discussion of Article 6 as a whole. Is there any further discussion for Article 6? CFP? We have a motion to call the bill in its entirety to question, second by Senator Beckman. Moving on to the vote for the call to question. All those in favor of calling to question bill number... Bill number 2526-21. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes 8-1-1. All right, we'll now be moving on to, if I can get to my other agenda. That was the vote on the bill.
I thought that was the vote on the call of question.
Oh, apologies. I thought we had 2 votes. Do you only have 1 vote?
Yeah.
Okay, then we are now on the vote of the bill. I apologize. All those in favor of Bill 2526-21, please raise your hand. 6, 7, 8. All those opposed? And all those who abstain, that passes 8-0. Moving on to Bill 2526-19, Pro Tem Bluedwam.
Bill number 2526-19. We, the members of the student government at Utica of SUNY Poly, as represented in the Senate, do hereby enact as follows: to update the terms of the contracts to better reflect the modern requirements of the associated positions.
Is there any discussion for a bill? Treasurer Weddle.
Under the Vice President contract, Chief Operations article, I'd like to entertain a motion to strike out the 6th bullet point, which states the Vice President will co-manage executive officers and ensure progress towards the completion of the executive platform. The executive board is, largely speaking, an equal board. Pretty much speaking, every single executive bar the president, who is the chief executive officer of the organization, works together. I'm very confused as to why this was inserted. The 3 executives are the president's supervisor. It doesn't make sense for one of them to be above the other 2. If we want to have a balanced executive board, I really don't understand why this is in here. I yield.
I'm going with that. Is there an so heard? So heard by Senator Beckman. Is there a second? Second by Senator Khan. Moving to discussion of the amendment, I'd like to pass the chair over to the president.
I accept.
All right.
The motion at hand, Vice President Chaput.
Sure. So this original line was actually in the Chief of Staff's contract, and that is an appointed position by the president. That's not even an elected position. which should very much so is not right. You shouldn't have you shouldn't have two or more parties who are elected be overseen by what could just be the best friend of the president. That's not really fair. Now, the vice president, chief operations officer, they have to handle operations. If the treasurer is not, say, putting in purchase requests that the clubs need or that the organizations need, the vice president can't hold them accountable, but that's directly under the vice president's jurisdiction. Why should it be that? And if the president also doesn't find them holding accountable, well, now you just have a stalemate, because the president at that point is the only one who can actually give out that strike. Whereas the chief operations officer, who has to work with these organizations pretty much by contract and make sure that everything is running smoothly, if they're not able to make sure things are running smoothly, then nothing's going to run smoothly. I yield.
Line that was originally in the Chief of Staff contract, my best guess is that was meant to refer to the Chief of Staff, who is considered a relinquished voting member, a non-voting member of the Executive Board, who is supposed to be confirmed by the Senate, appointed by the President. Realistically speaking, what that turned into was the Chief of Staff managing the Executive Cabinet. We have many instances in our policies and procedures where it used to say Executive Cabinet, but then they kind of crossed out the Cabinet, so they just put in Executive. That's why we have people attending meetings that it doesn't really make sense for them to be attending. The Vice President is an executive officer. They're in charge of operations, which realistically is the Senate and the organizations. They have to manage 4 organizations and the entirety of the Senate. The immediate supervisor of the treasurer and the secretary is the president. If the president is not doing his job, that's where you get into impeachment. That's where you get into the remainder of the executive board giving him a strike. The only people that the president directly manages is the executive board. I really don't understand why you need to add an additional supervisor. The vice president, there's nothing within the remainder of the policies and procedures that suggests the vice president has this power. Adding it as a single line in the contract, I think if you want to expand the vice president position in general to be that, then you need to take a much bigger look at the policies and procedures overall. You're essentially adding one line which greatly expands the vice president's authority. You mentioned if the treasurer is not doing their job, they're not submitting purchase requests, the vice president should be able to step in. Does that mean that they're now a supervisor of the treasurer? Because you really didn't clarify that, and it's not clarified within the contract. And I think if these things need to be clarified, and since they haven't been, and since this is a massive change to the internal structure of student government, I think we need to spend a lot more time on it, and I don't think it should be snuck into a contract bill which overhauls every single contract as a single bullet point. I yield.
Senator Beckman?
And having the ability to strike anyone in an org, but an executive position is not necessarily something they should be overseeing. That is the president's job. I yield.
Webb?
As the duties outline, right, the president's actually all out-facing things, and the vice president is all in-facing things. So in-facing things is all operations within SGU. That includes the executive board, that includes the organizations, that includes the Senate. It's the operations of the entire organization. Now, to answer first the treasurer's mention of, does that mean the vice president stepping? Never said stepping in. It's holding them accountable to their job. That's what I stated, is that if the treasurer hadn't done something, then the vice president, who is working in the works with the organizations, that was the example given, was able to step in and support the organizations and make things are still moving. Now, the original point was that this was under the chief of staff's job. That's a person, again, who can just be the best friend, hired, put in. That's how that contract currently is, and now it's being striked out in this contract. I do understand that the president oversees the executive board, and that makes sense. However, they don't handle internal operations. That is the vice president's job.
Senator Novak?
I just want to state that I don't think the president should be the outward-facing and the vice president should be the inward-facing. I think both the vice president and the president should be inward-facing and outward-facing at the same time. I think it is a bit of, my personal opinion, a bit of a weird system to have a president be a public head and then the vice president be an inward head. That's a bit weird because the president should be the one who is in charge of anything. Second of all, I'd like to make a motion to strike
We're currently
the vice.
in a motion, so
Oh, we are still in the motion.
Yeah.
What was the motion?
to strike out.
Oh, that's the motion. I
bullet
was about
point.
to mix. Never mind. But I think we should not be delegating because then it should be vice president of internal affairs and vice president of external affairs. That should be the position then. But the president should be doing as much of stuff internal as they are doing external. There's nothing that's in the contract on policy stating that that's the purpose of the vice president position. The vice president is supposed to be the bridge between the Senate and the orgs with the exec board. And in the past, the president has also been plenty involved within the internal affairs of the SGU, and just because that's not how it is this year doesn't mean we should be enforcing that of being always the case.
Treasurer Weddle.
To kind of build off that a little bit, if you look at what the vice president is actually supposed to be doing, it states that the vice president is responsible for informing senators of their duties, violation of those duties, and the possible penalties involved when those duties. That covers the Senate. It then goes on to later state that they shall function as the chief administrator of the organizations. They are to supervise all organizations, chair meetings with the organization heads at least bi-weekly, conduct one-on-one meetings, ensure organizations are following their governing documents, et cetera, et cetera. Nowhere in that does it say the vice president is supposed to be co-managing the executive board alongside the president. As far as holding people accountable, executives can talk to each other. If there's a person who isn't upholding their contracted duties, you don't need a line in the contract for the vice president to be able to go to that person and say, hey, have you done this? If they're not responding, that's when you go to the president. Unless you're giving them the authority to actually manage that individual, to be a supervisor of that individual, the addition of this to the contract itself doesn't do anything. If you're making that change, you've now elevated the vice president to be on the same level of the president as far as managing the entirety of the organization. If the president is only supposed to be outwardly facing, that erases or really reassigns the vast majority of their not insignificant internal power as, again, the elected president of the entirety of student government to manage all of the people within the executive branch. The executive branch consists of our cabinet, it consists of our Senate, and it consists of the executive board. The executive board sits on top of this hierarchy. The vice president does not sit on top of the executive board, the president does. The president oversees the executive board and the executive board itself oversees the remainder of the executive branch. The vice president specifically oversees the organizations. Nowhere within our policies and procedures has it ever been suggested that the vice president oversees the executive board. So there is not a reason for the vice president to be co-managing the executive board. There are very few people who have their immediate supervisor listed as the SGU vice president. The executive board members, other than the president, are one of them. Thank you.
Vice President.
Sure. So again, also, I would like to just make note that as soon as we entered discussion, I gave up the chair to make motions. It wasn't, and it was just the first motion made was immediately after we got into discussion. So I did have plans on making motions to update the vice presidents in the duties listed. Now, going back into some of the things discussed, this does not take away or give the vice president the power to delegate tasks. In fact, that is still kept to the president. The president is still effectively above the vice president. But I will state that the first line within the president's contract is must carry out any and all policies requiring a public or interdepartmental presence. This means that they are focusing on literally everything outside of SGU, and if you want to add on also facing things within SGU, that's just a lot of work for one person. The vice president's whole job is managing people in the organization, but not outside. The vice president is there as a support to the president. They're supposed to be there to support the president's efforts in literally every way internally. So it doesn't make sense for the vice president to not be able to help the president manage things internally when the president is already managing things externally. It's a division of power specifically so that you overwork one person and make them do everything. I yield.
What? Wait, hold on. There's a point of order.
Entire horseshoe and you've ignored the pro temp whose hand has been way up since the Web representative spoke last
Well,
time.
could you raise your hand higher? I'm not seeing it behind the
Well,
laptop.
you s-
Pro Tem.
Thank you. To Webb's prior point of having it,
Well, I'm the chair, so I decided pro tem. Hold on, Webb, pro tem.
Point to appeal the chair's decision.
Is it-
That's a motion you can make. I guess point of information. You can make a motion to appeal the decision of a chair, and if someone seconds it, you can vote.
Is there a
to-
second to this point? See, no second, pro tem. Second by Senator Fisher. We're moving to appealing the chair's decision.
Basically, if we vote yes, it means we ignore the point of order the chair made, and Webb gets to continue talking. Otherwise, it goes. That's how this works. It's a motion under Robert's rules.
For those who are in favor of this appeal of the chair's decision, please raise your hand. For those who are opposed and those who abstain, that motion dies. Pro Temp?
to Webb's prior point of having it stated in the vice president contract but not state in the president contract that it will be co-managed, as it currently states in pro temp, the pro temp co-manages the Senate with the vice president, but there is no mention of the pro temp in the vice president contract, so I just wanted to clarify that. We have not, SGU has not made it a precedent in our policies to state the higher position, to mention the lower position co-managing with the in the higher position's contract. I yield.
Webb?
President, wherein the president's contract, the first bullet point states that they must carry out any and all policies requiring a public or departmental presence. The first line of the vice president's contract states must attend all executive and cabinet meetings. That doesn't mean the primary duty of the vice president is attending the executive and cabinet meetings. It just means that that's the first bullet point. The president is required to carry out any and all policies that require a public or interdepartmental presence, but that's not their only responsibility. They're supposed to be attending a lot of internal meetings. They're supposed to be making a lot of internal decisions. Part of that is managing the executive board and the executive cabinet. I think you've lost your way a little bit if that's what you're basing that off of. The president is the president of the entirety of the organization, unless they are supposed to be solely a public, not involved member of government who just represents the face of government. They are supposed to be involved in internal operations. There's very few organizations out there in general that don't have their president involved in the decision-making processes, and that includes the management and supervision of the people who fall under the president. The people who fall directly under the president are the executive board and the president's executive cabinet. I yield to media.
Hold on. Senator Beckman had his hand much longer than media. Well, as the chair, I'll decide who gets yielded the floor. Senator Beckman.
Can I entertain a motion to appeal the chair's decision now that the chair is no longer yielding of the people involved in this conversation. So moved by.
So heard by Senator Novak. Is there a second? Second by Senator Rose. We're moving to voting on appealing the chair's decision. For those who approve, please raise your hand. For those who do not approve, raise your hand. For those who abstain, that motion passes. Media.
I also manage the executive board. I'm sure club exec boards work in a similar way. I've never, even though I believe that the president of SGU should also be managing their exec board as well, I feel that if we just have them do duties externally, it's kind of just them being a figurehead. Like, they have no real, at all. I yield to Webb.
I'd also like to continue that point, is that there is a standard that you are to delegate as president. I get that completely. But there is also coexisting and just handing off work. This, in and of itself, this contract pretty much states that the president just lets the vice president have everything. That's just the vice president overseeing all of this, and that is just, it's just egregious to me that we would do that. Because the president needs something else to do than just going to be in those external meetings and doing those external stuff. They need to have a say among their executive members that they have to work with. You have the vice president overseeing, I actually don't know how many members are completely in that. You have them overseeing all these people and being like, okay, you do this, this, and this. Well, I also got to do this, this, and this, and this. Well, the president's in some random meeting. No, it's not what you're going to do. You need to fix this and make sure that the president oversees their executive board that they are sworn in to work with. I yield to pro temp already. Judge, sorry, little on you.
Thank you. I just want to provide some clarity because I feel like some of the horseshoe members are a bit confused on what the line is. It says co-manage. It doesn't mean that the vice president will be mainly managing. That's still the president's duty. In the case that the president is overwhelmed in their job, for an example wise, or the president, let's say, is away for a conference for a week or two, then that kind of goes down to the vice president. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be the vice president. They are a secondary. It doesn't mean that they're the first point. I yield.
Senator Beckman.
Vice President, what exactly he interprets this line as giving him the power to do. I yield to the Vice President. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm going to kind of answer that in a couple ways. First off, as it reads out, it's co-managing. This is very similar to how in our current constitution, the pro tempore also co-managed the Senate. If any of you have seen how that's been going through these years, it's the pro tempore works on the Senate so that the vice president can help work on the orgs more and delegate tasks to the pro temp. It is not a complete replacement of work. It is in addition to help out the said position. Now, to continue on with answering that question, and to point out some very jarring things that I hope the orgs are aware of, several of the orgs already have the vice president above all the other executive board members. This is not a new thing. This is half the orgs, in fact, have the vice president above other executive officers. That's not new. Most other schools have the vice president above all other officers. That's how it is in a majority of the SUNY schools. It's not a new thing. In addition, this works kind of like how the chief of staff works, with that the president's still above him. It's not equal levels. The president is still above them. The presidents can still delegate tasks to everyone else. The vice president doesn't have that power. It's not in their contract. They can't delegate the tasks out. But they can hold people responsible that need to be held responsible if they're not aiding in the operations and ensuring that there's progress being made towards the executive platform. I yield.
Treasurer Weddle.
To address briefly Pro Temp Ludowan's point as far as it being co-managed, I recognize that it's co-managed and it's not managed, but in the situation where the president is unavailable or knows that they're going to be unavailable, they are allowed to delegate authority to the vice president. That can include management of the remainder of the executive board. If the president isn't doing their duties, or if the president is truly unavailable, then what should occur is presidential succession, in which case the vice president will become the president to start off with. To To provide some context, some historical context, going back to 2022, stipend parity, stipend equivalency was set for the executive board. Previously, there were different stipends depending on which position you were in the executive board. This was changed because the executive board at the time felt that it was necessary to reflect a equality in pay to reflect the equality in status. Obviously, the president is still above, per our Constitution. They are the highest officer within student government. But the remaining 3 positions were meant to be seen as equal because we wanted an executive board that was all going to be working together cohesively, not hierarchy amongst 4 individuals. Realistically, you're going to have the vice president in some years, depending on how they interpret that line, as leaving it all up to the president. In other years, you're going to have them supervising the secretary and treasurer, which I don't think is the intent of this line. In the event that the vice president has to co-manage those other 2 executive positions, they should be working with their supervisor, the president, to ensure that the treasurer and secretary are doing their duties. There's no need for the addition of this line. I don't think what other SUNY schools are doing is really relevant in this regard. Our organizations are very different than student government. Their executive board positions are not elected. Ours are. I yield.
Open forum. I'd like to pass the chair back to Vice President Chaput.
I accept. We're in open forum. Is there any discussion for open forum? President Lunaharo.
Could I entertain a motion to reopen the previously stated motion to just vote on it and then move on? I yield.
We have a motion.
Entertained.
You'd have to reopen the discussion of the entire thing. Did you got that as a motion?
Could I entertain a motion to reopen discussion of the previous bill? So moved by Pro Tem Pluruan.
Seconded by Senator Capo. All right, going into discussion of reopening the bill. Sorry, not discussion. Going to voting on reopening the bill. All those in favor of reopening the bill, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And all those who abstain? All right, that passes 8-1-1. All right, we're back into the bill as a whole. Yeah.
From our treasurer, what SUNY school do you know has a non-elected executive board?
Our treasurer.
Our Wildcat Esports, our Wildcat Events Board, our Wildcat Media, our Club Advisory Board. I was referring to the executive board of those organizations. I apologize if I misspoke. I yield.
Or did that die when we went into open forum? I yield.
Secretary.
We're still in motion.
All right,
Okay.
good.
I'd like to pass the chair off to the president.
I accept. Webb.
I'd like to ask that our treasurer amend his motion slightly so it's also added to the president's contract more outlined in verbiage.
Treasurer.
If I can just respond, can I just get some clarity on that? I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
Your motion to remove that bullet point, if you could add it to the president's contract so it is more clearly stated in the contract, since we seem to not understand what duties are delegated to.
Would you like to rescind and remake? Entertain any motion? Senator Beckman.
Separate motions. This is separate, and we should go add it to the president, but I don't want to lump it all together. Just get one out and then the other out. I yield.
Any further discussion on the motion, Treasurer Weddle?
Just to sort of restate an earlier point, the vice president is already expected to manage 4 different student organizations, each of which have dozens of their own members, all sorts of duties and responsibilities that they are required to fulfill. In addition to that, the vice president is required to oversee the Senate. That includes the overseeing of 8 different committees. The vice president is normally also required to chair election committees. The vice president is...
I apologize. I may have to cut you off. This point has been repeatedly made throughout the whole discussion earlier. If there's any new points or any new information, please raise your hand. CFB. Motion to call the questions. There's a second. Pro Tem Pluruan. Voting into calling the question. For those of you who would like to call the question, please raise your hand. those who oppose, for those who abstain, that passes 10-0-0. We are now voting into removing the bullet point of the Vice President will co-manage executive officers and ensure progress toward the completion of the executive platform. For those of you who are in favor of removing this bullet point, please raise your hand. For those of you who are, sorry, we'll repeat the vote. For those of you who approve of removing this bullet point, please raise your hand. For those of you who oppose, for those of you who abstain, it's a tie. So we're back into discussion of the removal of this bullet point. Is there any further discussion? Vice President Chaput.
My original intent was to update the duties up above to better match this, considering that it wasn't, I didn't have time to hand over the chair to make a motion. That was the original intent, was to match that bullet point. I will also say, this is not something that was snuck into the contract. This went in through policy committee.
Treasurer
And
Weddle.
was directly brought up in policy committee.
Treasurer Weddle.
If I can respond to that, what's the reason for it not having been included then in the revision of the Vice President duties? The Vice President duties were actually amended in Article 1 under 1.2.0. Pretty much they were clarified as far as committees go. They were clarified as far as the labeling goes for the different meetings they're required to chair. I'm just curious how this was able to be added to the contract and then failed to get added into our actual policies. I yield.
Vice President.
Yeah, sure. This was delegated to a member of the policy committee and was then trusted to be turned into the secretary for approval. If it didn't get added in, it didn't get added in.
Senator Novak.
I was going to say, just because it went through policy committee doesn't mean policy committee gave a consensus agreement on this, because if I remember correctly, we had each contract and we delegated it to all the members of policy committee. For example, I was given the a secretary contract to
Point
look.
of information, that was the original part. This contract has been through policy committee for like 2 months. The section she's referring to is within that first month when the contract was being made. This section was added in the second month after it had already been on the table for about a whole month, and then was added in, brought up during policy committee as a specific thing because 2 things were being looked at: Senate contract changes, this change, and a couple touch-ups to the duties, and then it was delegated out and then resubmitted back in. This was not during the initial delegation of the contracts.
Well, I mean, I guess then I don't remember, because I don't remember ever looking at the contracts as a whole while in policy committee. I assume we're delegating the work out and then that being it. I don't remember actually fully working and then voting on if we agreed with all of the changes. You might have not been there for that meeting, or I might just be remembering, so I apologize if that's the case, but I'm just stating how it is from my memory. I yield.
Pro Tem Plutoan.
As a member of policy committee, I'd like to state that, yes, first, these contracts were divided up and delegated to members of policy committee, and then we all came together and drafted a bill on it. That bill was then reviewed multiple times within policy committee. It's not something that just happened. This was thought through within policy committee for multiple meetings before it came here. I yield.
Senator Pena. There's a motion to call the question, second by Pro Tem Plutoan. Voting on calling the question, for those of you who would like to call the question, please raise your hand. For those of you who would not like to call the question, for those who abstain, that passes 10-0-0. We are now voting on removing the bullet point that was extensively discussed. For those of you who are in approval of removing this bullet point, please raise your hand. For those of you who aren't in favor, please raise your hand. Those of you who abstain, that ties. We're back into discussion of removing the...
It's up to you now.
It's up to me? Point of information. Who's it up to?
Chair, or is it up to the vice president? Because to my knowledge, it's up to the vice president.
Could somebody consult the policies, please? Yes.
The tie-breaking vote. But if anyone would want to, we should find it and
Are you able to find the exact?
Currently.
Yes. Apologies.
But yeah.
Senator Novak.
Would it be possible to make a motion just to like change that, suspend that rule and change it to be the president who's a tiebreaker just because of conflict of interest? Would that
We
be
are in a
possible?
vote, and I'd highly discourage that because that's just sidestepping our currently existing policies.
Okay, I was just wondering because since this is the vice president contract, I just wasn't sure if there would be a conflict of interest as well.
I'm trying to find. If anybody could find the Treasurer Weddle.
Yeah, so for clarity, it is under House rules. It states that in the event of a tie in voting, the standing vice president can move back to the discussion. If that vote still results in a tie, the standing vice president has the final vote and can vote that the result remains a tie. In regard to Senator Novak's point, I think it's very reasonable. I yield.
Senator Novak.
Can I ask
So it's up to you.
our advisors if, since it does go to the vice president as a tiebreaker vote, this is the vice president contract and we're modifying it, would it be possible to make a motion to just have that tiebreaker vote be the chair just for this one time, so that way there isn't a potential conflict of interest? And I guess I yield to the
Advisor?
So you wouldn't be able to do that because if you revoke the policy, it would go into whatever Robert's rule says. So you would have to then follow Robert's rules.
Okay.
Because if you remove the policy, anytime that we don't have a specific policy for something, that's what we default to. So if you remove, you can't change the policy temporarily. I mean, you could go back to what Robert's rule says, but I believe Robert's rule says that whoever the chair is. So if that's what you want to do, I don't know.
Could we get a confirmation of what Robert's rules actually says? Treasurer Weddle?
Yeah, so for some clarification on that, for tie votes in cases in which the chair votes affects it, in all other cases, the presiding officer of a member of the assembly can but is not obliged to vote whenever his vote will affect the result. That is, he can vote to either break or to cause a tie. if
So it's
a
up to
two-thirds
the.
vote. So the chair, it would be the chair's decision. So if you suspended that House rule, it would then be up to the current chair.
Seen as we, we we are in a vote and it's a tie,
It oversees it, doesn't it?
and there's an issue of conflict of interest. Could I ask our Chief Justice to state her opinions in this matter?
I think that you could rescind the motion, then motion to suspend House rules, and then do it, but I wouldn't advise doing that.
Point of
as
information to the Chief Justice, we just had a vote on it. We're not in a motion, we just voted.
Yeah,
We're
you
in a
voted
vote.
and it tied, so then you're back into the motion,
Nope,
right?
nope, we're still in a vote.
So technically we voted and we're in a tie, and the Vice President is supposed to break the tie. However, there has been raised concerns of this could be a conflict of interest. Seeing as there has been nothing changed, the Vice President is still the one deciding what we will do with this current decision.
I'll leave it as a tie.
Point of order, we open back discussion on the bill, which is why.
Seeing as our Vice President concluded it as a tie, we are now back into discussion of the bullet point motion as a whole. If anybody would like to make the motion to suspend this policy rule, please, now's the time to make it. Yes.
Yeah, I voted.
He
to
voted as a tie.
maintain as a tie.
Yes. Pro Tem Plutoan?
Can the chair clarify what they just said?
So, as of right now, nobody suspended the policies in order to have the Vice President decide the tiebreaker. So the Vice President decided the tiebreaker to keep it as a tie. So we're now back into the discussion of the motion at hand. Discussion? No, we're still in the motion because the motion tied, so we're back into the discussion of the motion.
He voted to abstain.
He voted to tie. Yeah. Yeah.
Information to either chair, chief justice, advisors, whoever can answer that. The motion went into a tie the first time in the Senate, went into a tie a second time in the Senate, and then the vice president voted that it remains a tie. So does that not leave as it's a tie and we're done with that motion? Can somebody please clarify that? Because I do not know any policy that goes above that says if the vice president votes that it's a tie, we go back into discussion or go back into anything again. I yield to Chief Justice.
I think that it's clear that this motion either needs to be changed or we need to discuss more. So either
President had the final vote and it is a tie.
But if it's a tie, the motion doesn't die and the motion doesn't pass. So we're in the middle. Point. Twice. Pro Tem? Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Point of information, just under Robert's Rules 12th edition, it just says we go back into discussion if there is a tie and the chair votes to keep it as a tie. It just continues the discussion until a tie is broken or the motion's rescinded.
Yes.
I don't have the exact file. I can try and find the exact thing of it if we want that.
Pro Tem Pluto.
In the interest of time and that knowing that myself and many of the senators have class at 2, I would like to motion to adjourn this meeting.
There's a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Second by Senator Capo. For those of you who would like to adjourn, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For those of you who do not want to adjourn, please raise your hand. For those of you who abstain, that passes 8-0.